Everyone thinks I hit the jackpot when I married Arthur Sterling. The wedding of the century, the tabloids called it. A digital princess swept away to a limestone castle on a cliff. But you don't marry a man like Arthur for the love. You marry him for the survival. Only problem is I forgot one thing. In exactly 10 minutes, the most expensive house in the world is programmed to erase everything inside it to protect its master's secrets. Including me. To understand why I'm about to be deleted, you have to understand the contract. Because in the world of the 1%, love isn't a feeling. It's a hostile takeover. The ink was barely dry on the non-disclosure agreement when I was whisked away from my basement apartment in Queens. 3 months ago I was just a ghost in the machine, a hacker for hire who made the mistake of poking a sleeping giant. I thought I was raiding a bank. I didn't realize I was raiding a god. Arthur Sterling didn't send the police. He sent a black car and a piece of paper that promised $50 million for 1 year of my life. The catch. I was to be his wife in name only, a public face for a man who refused to be seen. The Sterling estate is a terrifying masterpiece of glass and reinforced concrete, jutting out over a 300-foot drop into the Atlantic. For the first few weeks I lived there in beautiful isolation. The house was alive. The lights dimmed when I felt tired, the music shifted based on my heart rate, and the kitchen produced my favorite meals before I even had to ask. I was living with a phantom. Arthur's voice would come through the walls, smooth as hand-stitched silk and cold as a subterranean lake. He was charming, brilliant, and utterly invisible. He told me he stayed hidden because the more people see of you, the more they can take. I told him he was just a coward with a big budget. He laughed, and for a moment the ghost felt real. But I am a creature of logic and code, and curiosity is my primary drive. I began to notice glitches in the house's perfect digital map. There was a dead zone in the West Wing, a section that didn't exist on the blueprints. I spent nights building a signal jammer, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When I finally bypassed the biometric locks and stepped into that forbidden corridor, I didn't find a monster or a scarred man. I found a surveillance hub. Hundreds of screens flickered with footage of my own life. My graduation. My father's funeral. My first day of college. Arthur Sterling hadn't just found me. He had been curating me for 20 years. When he finally stepped out of the shadows, my heart didn't just stop. It shattered. He was young, dangerously handsome, and his eyes were a piercing, unnatural blue. He looked exactly like the man in the old photographs with my father. Photographs taken decades ago. He hadn't aged a single day. "You were my father's partner," I whispered, backing away toward the steel door. Arthur didn't deny it. He just looked at me with a hunger that wasn't about money or power. "Now that you've seen the truth, Sloane, the contract is no longer about a year," he said. He pressed a button, and the steel shutters slammed down over every exit in the wing. "Welcome home. For real this time." That was the moment the game changed. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his ultimate collection. He began to explain the Redemption Initiative, a technology that used cellular stasis to stop time for the human body. He had used it on himself, and now he intended to use it on me. He wanted us to be frozen in this perfect gilded moment forever. He spoke of love, but all I saw was a cage. I realized then that my father hadn't died of natural causes. He had died because he refused to let Arthur turn me into a science experiment. I spent the next month playing the part of the devoted, captivated bride. I let him teach me the secrets of his empire while I secretly planted worms in his mainframe. I learned that the house wasn't just a home. It was a giant hard drive, and I was the only virus it couldn't detect. I had to wait for the exact moment when his ego outweighed his caution. Tonight was that night. At the anniversary gala, while he was busy showing me off to the board of directors as his greatest achievement, I triggered the failsafe. But Arthur is always 3 steps ahead. He knew I was hacking the system. He didn't stop me, he just redirected the purge. Instead of wiping his data, the system is now wiping the entire physical structure. He's already gone, probably headed to his secondary site in the Alps, leaving me here to be deleted with the rest of his mistakes. The countdown is at 6 minutes now. The air in this server room is getting hot as the processors overclock to the point of explosion. He thinks he's erased me. He thinks he's won the ultimate buyout of my soul. But Arthur forgot one thing about hackers: we never keep our backups in the same place as the original. I'm not just trying to escape this house. I'm uploading his entire consciousness to the public cloud. If I'm going down, the Ice King is going to melt in the heat of 1,000 headlines. The walls are beginning to vibrate. The glass is starting to spiderweb under the pressure. I have 5 minutes to find the manual override in a house that was built to never be overridden. I can hear his voice one last time over the intercom, sounding almost sad. I really did love you, Sloane, in my own way. My fingers hit the final sequence of keys. Then you should have known better than to give me a contract with a kill switch, Arthur. The screen flashes white. The floor drops. And the real story begins. The crash of the Atlantic waves against the cliffs was the last thing I heard before the world dissolved into white noise and fire. I didn't wake up in a hospital, and I didn't wake up in heaven. I woke up on a floor made of cold, industrial steel, the smell of ozone and burnt silicon stinging my nostrils. My vision was a blurred mess of red emergency lights. I wasn't dead, but as I looked at my wrists, I realized I wasn't free either. I was wearing a high-tech biometric bracelet that pulsed with a faint blue light, the same shade as Arthur's eyes. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I was in a bunker miles away from the smoldering ruins of the Sterling estate. A single monitor flickered to life in the center of the room. There was no video, just a wave file bouncing to the rhythm of that hauntingly familiar voice. You were always a fighter, Sloane, Arthur's voice echoed, sounding clearer than it ever had through the house speakers. You thought the purge was a death sentence. It was actually a transit system. You're in the Alpine Archive now. My private sanctuary. The world thinks Sloane Sterling died in a tragic gas leak. You are officially a ghost, just like me. I stumbled toward the monitor, my fingers instinctively reaching for a keyboard that wasn't there. He had stripped me of my tools. No laptop, no jammer, no wires. Just me and the clothes on my back. I looked around the room and realized it wasn't a cell. It was a library. Thousands of physical books lined the walls, and in the center of the room sat a desk with an old-fashioned typewriter and a stack of blank paper. If you want to communicate, you'll have to do it the old way, Arthur said. No code. No backdoors. Just the truth. Tell me why you really tried to destroy the only person who ever saw your true value. I grabbed the typewriter and slammed my hand against the keys, the metal clacking like gunfire. I didn't write a confession. I wrote a vow. I'm going to find the heart of this machine, Arthur. And I'm going to pull the plug. I knew he was watching through hidden lenses, analyzing my heart rate, my pupil dilation, my every breath. He wasn't just my husband or my captor. He was an apex predator studying his prey. But he had made one fatal mistake. He assumed that because I was a digital genius, I was helpless in a physical world. I spent the next 3 days in total silence, refusing to speak to the walls. I explored every inch of the archive. It was a labyrinth of cold stone and humming servers buried deep inside a mountain. On the 4th day I found it, the glitch in his physical sanctuary. Behind a row of ancient Greek philosophy books, there was a cooling vent that vibrated at a frequency slightly different from the others. It was a ventilation shaft for the main server core. If I could get inside, I wouldn't need a keyboard. I could manually reroute the power to the biometric lock on my wrist. That night, Arthur spoke again, his voice sounding uncharacteristically weary. I saw what you wrote, Sloane. You think I'm a monster for wanting to keep us perfect. But look at the world out there. It's decaying. People lie, they age, they betray. Here in the stasis we are eternal. I saved your father's data, you know. He's not gone. He's in the cloud. I can bring him back for you. All you have to do is stop fighting me. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the ultimate bait. The chance to see my father again, to hear his voice, even if it was just an AI reconstruction. I stood in front of the vent, the screwdriver I had fashioned from a sharpened typewriter ribbon hidden in my sleeve. My father died so I wouldn't be a prisoner of your perfection, Arthur, I shouted at the ceiling. He'd rather be a memory than a line of code in your twisted fantasy. I jammed the metal into the vent's casing and twisted. The sparks showered over me, but I didn't flinch. I crawled into the dark, narrow shaft, the heat rising as I got closer to the core. I reached the central chamber, a cathedral of glowing blue towers. This was the brain of Arthur Sterling's empire. I saw the liquid nitrogen tanks, the fiber optic veins, and there in the center was the stasis pod. It was open. I climbed down the ladder, my breath hitching as I approached it. I expected to find Arthur inside, sleeping his way through the decades. But the pod was empty. A single note sat on the velvet lining, written in the same sharp ink as the contract. "I'm not in the machine, Sloane. I'm standing right behind you." I spun around, but the room was empty. Then I felt it, the cold pressure of a needle against my neck. My vision began to swim. The blue lights of the servers merged into a single blinding sun. "Part of being eternal," Arthur whispered into my ear as I slumped into his arms, "is knowing when to restart the simulation. Sleep now, my love. When you wake up, we'll try a different script. Maybe one where we meet in a cafe in Paris. Maybe one where I'm just a man and you're just a girl. But the ending will always be the same." As the darkness took me, I felt my fingers brush against the cooling intake of the main server. With the last of my strength, I jammed the metal ribbon into the spinning fan. The sound of grinding metal filled the room, followed by the sweet, terrifying smell of an electrical fire. He might have the script, but I just burned the stage. The smell of fresh rain on warm pavement hit me before I even opened my eyes. It wasn't the metallic, sterile scent of the Alpine archive. It was the smell of Paris in the spring. I was sitting at a small, round bistro table, a half-empty cup of espresso in front of me and the sound of distant accordions drifting through the air. I looked down at my hands. The biometric bracelet was gone. My skin looked soft, sun-kissed and healthy. I felt a wave of peace so profound it almost made me forget the fire, the bunker, and the man who had stolen my life. "You're late for our anniversary, Sloane," a voice said. I looked up. Arthur was sitting across from me, wearing a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal tan, scarred forearms. He wasn't the Ice King here. He looked like a man who spent his days in the sun and his nights reading poetry. He looked human. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb grazing my knuckles. "You were miles away. What were you thinking about?" I looked into those blue eyes and for a split second I couldn't remember. The memory of the server room felt like a nightmare from a different life. I think I had a bad dream," I whispered. Arthur smiled, and it was a warm, genuine expression that made my heart ache. "It was just the stress of the move, my love. We left the city behind. No more code, no more Sterling Global. Just us and the vineyard." But as I reached for my coffee, I noticed something. The steam from the cup was rising in a perfect, repeating loop. I watched it. Up, swirl, fade. Swirl, fade. Every 3 seconds the pattern reset. I looked at the waiter passing by. He bumped into a woman in a red dress. "Pardon," he said. 3 seconds later another waiter bumped into the same woman. "Pardon." The glitch. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't in Paris. I was in a level 4 neural simulation. The electrical fire I started in the archive hadn't killed us. It had triggered an emergency brain upload. Arthur had moved our consciousness into a sandbox environment while the physical servers repaired themselves. This was his perfect script. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling as I pulled my hand away. "How many times have we had this conversation today?" The smile on his face didn't fade, but his eyes went cold, the blue of a frozen lake. "Don't do this, Sloane. Don't look at the seams in the wallpaper. Just enjoy the view." "It's not real," I shouted, standing up. The bistro fell silent. Every patron, every waiter, every bird in the sky stopped moving. They all turned their heads to look at me, their faces blank and featureless. "The patterns are looping, Arthur. You're losing control of the simulation because I damaged the hardware." Arthur didn't stand up. He just sighed and took a sip of his coffee. "The hardware is fine, Sloane. It's your mind that's the problem. You refuse to accept a world without pain. You're obsessed with the truth, even when the truth is a burning building and a lonely death." He snapped his fingers. The Paris skyline began to pixelate, the beautiful buildings dissolving into raw, green binary code. The sky turned a sickly, glowing white. "If you won't live in my heaven," Arthur said, his voice now echoing with the power of a god, "then you can see what's left of the real world." Suddenly the simulation tore open. I was back in the stasis pod, but I wasn't in the archive. I was in a decaying, rusted facility. Through the cracked glass of the pod I saw the truth. Arthur Sterling wasn't a young man who had stopped time. He was an old man, decrepit, hooked up to 1,000 tubes, his body a withered husk. The Redemption Initiative wasn't a success. It was a desperate, failed attempt to escape death. He had been using my brain's processing power to keep his own consciousness alive, like a parasite feeding on a host. I saw my father in the pod next to mine. He wasn't a data file. He was a shell, his mind drained to build the very walls of Arthur's digital paradise. The $50 million, the contract, the marriage, it was all a lure to find a compatible neural match to prolong a dying man's ego. I reached for the emergency release, but my physical muscles were atrophied. I could see Arthur in the pod across from me, his eyes rolling back in his head as he tried to force the simulation back online. He was trying to pull me back into the bistro, back into the lie. "I won't go back," I wheezed, my lungs burning with the first real air they had tasted in months. I found the manual override, a physical lever beneath the heart rate monitor. I knew that pulling it would shut down the life support for the entire facility. It would kill Arthur. It would kill the AI version of my father. And it would likely kill me. Arthur's voice screamed inside my head, a digital roar of agony. "If you pull that lever, you erase everything. All the beauty, all the memories. You'll just be a corpse in the dirt." I looked at my father's peaceful, empty face. "Better a corpse," I whispered, "than a puppet." I slammed my weight against the lever. The hum of the machinery died instantly. The blue lights flickered and went out. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in 20 years, Arthur Sterling was silent. I felt the cold creeping into my limbs, the darkness closing in. But as my heart slowed to its final beat, I saw a flicker of light on the wall. A backup drive, powered by an independent battery, was blinking. It was labeled, "Project Phoenix, Outbound Upload." I smiled. I hadn't just shut him down. The virus I planted months ago had finally found a connection. In my final moments, I watched the progress bar hit 100%. The truth about Arthur Sterling, the Redemption Initiative, and the location of this facility was hitting every news desk on the planet. The Ice King was gone. And finally, so was the contract. The facility felt like a tomb. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of Arthur. For years he had been the wind in the vents and the pulse in the floorboards. Now he was just a heap of rusted hardware and a dead man in a glass jar. My heart was a sluggish weight in my chest, beating once every 10 seconds. I closed my eyes, ready for the dark. But the dark didn't come. Instead, a piercing, high-frequency tone shattered the silence. My eyes snapped open. The Project Phoenix backup drive wasn't just uploading data to the news. It was triggering an emergency medical extraction. The floor beneath my pod began to vibrate, and the entire unit slid backward into a sterile white hallway. A team of droids, programmed with a singular, cold purpose, swarmed the pod. They weren't there to save Sloan Vance. They were there to preserve the asset. I felt the prick of a needle, and the world blurred into a montage of white ceilings and the sound of helicopter blades. When I finally woke up, the air was salty. I was in a high-security ward on a private island, but the guards weren't wearing Sterling Global patches. They were wearing United Nations insignias. "Ms. Vance? Can you hear me?" A woman in a dark suit stood over my bed. She wasn't a ghost or a hologram. He was real. "I'm Agent Miller. Your upload reached us. The world knows everything. Arthur Sterling's estate has been frozen and his archive is being dismantled as we speak." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was filled with glass. "My father," I managed to croak. Miller's expression softened, but it didn't hide the grim truth. "The physical shell was too far gone, Sloan. But the data you extracted, it contained his core consciousness. We can't bring him back to life, but we can give him a voice. He's the star witness in the largest human rights trial in history." I spent months in that facility relearning how to walk, how to eat, and how to live in a world where my every thought wasn't being monitored by a billionaire sociopath. I was the girl who killed the ghost. I was a hero to the public, a legend in the hacking community, and the wealthiest widow in the world. Arthur's will, ironically, had never been changed. Despite everything, the legal contract still named me as the sole heir to his trillion-dollar empire. But wealth is a heavy thing when it's built on a foundation of souls. On the day I was released, I didn't go to the penthouse in Manhattan or the estate in the Hamptons. I went to a small, quiet cemetery in Queens. I sat by a new headstone that simply read, "Vance free at last." I held a small tablet in my hand. A voice came through the speaker, warm, familiar, and slightly grainy. "You did it, Sloane. You broke the loop." "I miss you, Dad," I whispered. "I'm not gone, honey. I'm just in the code now. And I can tell you one thing. The weather in the cloud is much better than it was in Arthur's basement." I laughed, a sound that felt foreign but right. But as I stood up to leave, my phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from an unknown source. No text. Just a video file. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. The video was a live feed of a small, nondescript cafe in a different part of the world. At a corner table, a man sat with his back to the camera. He was wearing a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal tan, scarred forearms. He reached for a cup of espresso, and as he did, the sunlight caught a faint blue glow beneath the skin of his wrist, the unmistakable shimmer of a neural implant. He didn't turn around. He just raised his cup in a silent toast toward the camera lens. The message attached to the video finally appeared. Section 12, Clause 4. The party of the first part reserves the right to a reboot. See you in the next life, Sloane. I looked at the screen, then at the peaceful grave of my father. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply deleted the message and crushed the phone under my heel. Arthur Sterling thought he was a god because he could live forever. But he forgot that I was the one who wrote the viruses. "I'll be waiting, Arthur," I whispered to the wind. "And this time I'm not signing a contract. I'm bringing a match." I walked out of the cemetery and into the bright, unpredictable light of a world that was finally, truly unscripted. The billionaire love story was over. The war had just begun.